This is probably what I would call the planning phase. At least for me personally, this is where sometimes I'll start dreaming about the garden. What do I need to do? What do I want to plant? This needs to be done. That needs to be done. So I like to call, January or so that kind of planning time. If you're a journaler, you could start making some lists, snapping some photos on your phone. To me, this is just that time to plan ahead. Because, as you know, when we plan, we usually have better end results.
Whether you're an experienced gardener or a novice, winter is a good time to plan this year's garden. According to a K-State Research and Extension horticulture agent, it's an opportunity to think about what you want to plant, any changes you'd like to make, and research new varieties. On today's Sound Living, getting the jump on spring and summer gardens. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Johnson County Extension horticulture agent Dennis Patton says that you'll save time, energy, and money by planting this year's garden now. Dennis, we don't often think about gardening this time of the year, but we probably should be, especially if we're planning to do some planting or maybe even some upgrading of our garden in the next growing season.
That is correct. It's cold outside, it's winter in Kansas, and we don't think about getting outside and gardening. But actually, this is probably what I would call the planning phase. At least for me personally, this is where sometimes I'll start dreaming about the garden. What do I need to do? What do I want to plant? I find myself a lot of times staring out the window looking about, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. So I like to call, January or so that kind of planning time. If you're a journaler, you could start making some lists, snapping some photos on your phone. But to me, this is just that time to plan ahead because, as you know, when we plan, we usually have better end results.
This is also a chance then to maybe do some research and find out maybe some new varieties or things that may be doing well in Kansas?
Right. This time of year is when if you do mail order, all the mail order catalogs have been arriving here the last few weeks. If you're a gardener, it's great to, get a blanket, curl up, and kind of peruse through the catalogs for something new, different. Same way, the internet is full, of course, of all sorts of goodies. Now, of course, you've got to be careful because, those descriptions are always saying it's the latest, the greatest, it's the best. But, it is a good time to, here again, make that list of things you want to add, whether it's a new tomato variety, cucumber variety, or a new flower in the garden. Now's really a good time to start making those plans to see if they're available or making orders.
We always talk about kind of dreaming, but we don't want to dream too big, do we? We want to make sure that we're staying realistic to what we can handle with our current space.
Yeah, Jeff, I kind of sometimes look out my back window and think to myself, oh my gosh, Dennis, what did you create in that backyard? You don't have as much energy now as when you were younger. And, the other thing we've noticed the last couple years with the COVID issue is that there's a lot of new people gardening, and also a lot of the younger generation, millennials and things, are getting out in the garden for the first time. And my best advice is always start small. It's always easier to scale up than it is to scale back down. Is this really the hobby for you? Is this the right thing for you? So, everyone's gung-ho to plant, March, spring fever hits. We want to get out in the garden. We plant our radishes and our onions and our potatoes. But by the time May, June rolls around, the weeds have started to grow, the rainfall's not coming, and it's like, do you really want to be out there or not? And, smaller, easier to maintain. And like I said, you can always scale up. It's harder to scale back down.
You mentioned the fact that a lot of people have taken up gardening. Do they stick with it? Have they been sticking with it from what you've heard?
As I've read research reports over the last couple years, the vast majority has stuck with it. Obviously, there were some that decided, gardening really wasn't for me. But no, I think I read that 50 to 75% of those people that picked up gardening have stuck with it in some form or other. What we are seeing in a lot of trends, though, are more container gardening, patio gardens, more the square foot raised bed gardening, where the growing space is more controlled. Maybe not so much the old Kansas farmstead garden that was, a half acre in size, where you needed the can and preserve to make sure you didn't starve during the winter. A lot of the people, vegetable gardening now, are doing it more just for fresh eating. supplementing their diet with that, fresh source of fruits and vegetables instead of going to the grocery store.
That's got to be kind of encouraging because that's something that we've been talking about for a number of years and encouraging people to do.
Yeah, talking about resources, we're kind of popcorning around here. When it comes to vegetable gardening, I always recommend people check out the Kansas Garden Guide, which is available online, free of charge. It's a PDF. You can download it. You can just view it online. You can buy it at your local extension office for around $10 or so. But if you're a novice gardener, even, a seasoned vegetable gardener, to me, that is kind of like the vegetable gardening Bible. There's a chart in the back of the book that has this little chart of when you plant, when you harvest. I tell you what, I keep that handy, even though after almost 40 years of being in this profession, I should have, when do you plant onions committed to memory. But sometimes it's just nice to have that in there because it'll tell you when to plant, when you're going to harvest, and then, of course, it has all the cultural information in there also.
Now, for some, this may sound a little odd, but having a map of the garden is also helpful.
Yeah, that's, here again, something you can do this time of year is plan out your garden. Because when it comes to vegetable gardens, in some areas, depending on how you grow, you could get maybe 2-3 uses out of that same plot of land. It doesn't just have to be one and done. We call it the concept of succession planting. So let's say maybe we put in some radishes, lettuce, spinach. Well, we could also put in peppers and tomatoes. The radishes go in the end of March, most parts of Kansas. Tomatoes go in May. The radishes are pretty much done by the time tomatoes go in. And so we can reuse that space. And I think that's what you're also seeing, this trend. Are people getting much, since gardens are getting smaller, people are getting much more resourceful of how they plant, the spacings, and just using every square inch of ground. The other thing, take pictures throughout the year of the garden for a couple of reasons. One, it just kind of helps you remember where you planted things last year so you can move them around. I know some people who will snap pictures of what varieties they planted, those type of things, and keep it on a file as opposed to writing it down. So there's more than one way to kind of skin the cat, so to speak, when it comes to keeping track and helping with that planning from year to year.
In the flower garden, if you have something that just doesn't seem right, something that seems out of place or something you don't like, how difficult is it to start either moving things around or just eliminating some things?
I have this mantra that I tell to people all the time, and it is, life is too short for ugly plants. And if you don't like something, it's not performing, get rid of it. You don't have to keep it. It's hard for some gardeners to quote-unquote kill a plant, get rid of a plant. But if it doesn't bring you joy, why have it in your garden? And so, start planning now. Is there something that you didn't like, didn't work? Get rid of it. Try something new, something different. Here again, back to extension information. K-State has a plethora of fact sheets and handouts and brochures on recommended plants, varieties, trees, shrubs, flowers that do well in our ever-changing Kansas climate. But yeah, when I got to the point in my life, kind of putting on my personal gardener hat, because when I was younger and naive, it's like, oh, it's a plant. I can't get rid of it. I can't kill it. I've got to continue nurturing it. But when I got to the point in my life where I decided, this plant doesn't bring me joy. Why do I have it? And it almost becomes, I hate to say this, but it's almost like this release of like, oh my gosh, it's finally gone. It's out of my life, and now I have something new to try that's going to bring me more joy. I had an old barberry bush in my garden that I'd get pricked, I'd be cleaning up leaves or whatever and get pricked by it. It's like, I'm done. I'm too old for this. I was mowing the yard one day, stopped, killed the lawnmower, went to the garage, got the saw, got the axe, and I chopped that out, and I never looked back, and I'm just as happy as can be. So, yes, change. Do what brings you joy in the garden. That's what it's all about.
It's also wise, if you can, to go to the local nursery and talk to them and get some of their thoughts as well on what's doing well in that region.
Correct. Your best source of information is, like I said, is going to be K-State Extension. Local nurseries and garden centers, of course, friends, neighbors, those type of things. But, after doing extension all these years and getting all these calls from your friends and neighbors, sometimes I have to question the accuracy of information from friends or neighbors. The other thing, I'm not sure I want to get into it, but, K-State has this K-State Garden Hour that has lots of great information for gardeners. We talk about recommended plants and culture and care throughout the entire year 2022.
Is this a time when we also need to start thinking about ordering seeds and maybe even ordering seeds? I don't know if the distribution chain is affected at all on that side, but that may be an issue.
When there was this huge rush back to gardening, vegetable garden seeds especially were in really short supply when the pandemic started back in 2020. That's kind of leveled out a little bit, but there are still some seed shortages. And the advantage of doing mail order is that you've got a lot bigger selection, of specific varieties. A lot of times when you're, relying on the store shelf, it's sometimes not the latest, it's not the newest, it's not the hottest variety. Sometimes it's some of the older varieties. So if you're an avid gardener and you really love to grow, tomato variety X or this specific type of pepper, then I think as you go to mail order through the catalogs, through the internet, that's where you can really expand and get into some more specialty varieties or ones that you really like or specialty crops. So to me, I think it's a combination of kind of buying local and buying online.
We're going to want to make that planting schedule as well then to make sure that we get things in the ground at the right time?
Correct. Yeah. So kind of back to that Kansas Garden Guide that kind of tells you when to plant. Yes, I think that's the advantage of planting. A lot of old-time gardeners, we have it kind of in the back of our mind and we need to do this. But I think it's always good just to jot down just kind of a schedule. Here again, you can't put down a specific day because our March, April weather is, kind of like now. One day it's 60 degrees, the next day it's 30 degrees. But, in mid to late March, that's when we start putting in the broccoli, the cauliflower, the cabbage, radishes, onions, the lettuce crops, spinach, those type of things. And then, we move into April, we start putting in some of the more, late April, some of the more warm season crops like the squash, the green beans. And then, of course, what everyone grows in the garden pretty much are tomatoes and peppers. They're like the number 1 and 2 crop. Those don't go in the ground until early May because they really need really warm soil conditions for them to get up and growing. But if you're going to be starting your own transplants, those type of things, that's going to be happening here February, March, depending on when it goes to the garden. Growing your own transplants is another way to kind of beat the winter blues. You can do it under lights in your basement, in a shut-off room, those type of things. And most transplant takes about 8 weeks to have a plant to go to the garden with.
I often hear people ask, are the conditions changing? Are we starting to have a later season, a later planting date? Has that changed dramatically in the last few years?
When I look at a lot of the statistics and things like that, yes, if you go back the last few years, 10, 15, 20 years, we have gained a few days to the growing season. It seems like a lot of times we're picking those up more maybe in the fall than in the spring. So, yes, we have seen a lengthening of the season by a few days. Nothing I would call significant. But it isn't really at this point in time majorly altered what those planting dates are, what those crop days are for most of us as gardeners.
When do we start buying some of the materials then, like the tools, the potting soil, and things like that?
Well, I always look for a sale. So you've got room to store it. I would say you can start gearing up your supplies. A lot of the box stores, once the holiday Christmas decorations go out, it's time to bring in the gardening supplies. So here again, if there are specific varieties of seeds or things you want, my advice would be buy early, don't wait. That way you have it. Same when it comes to, potting soil, supplies, those type of things. You have places to store it. If you can find it, get it, stockpile it, and then you're ready to go. And then you also have it. So when that whim hits you, you're not delayed. You can get right out there and get it done.
That's really the whole key, isn't it? Is being prepared, having a plan, and getting out there and just really doing the work and being prepared to follow through for the whole growing season.
Well, I think no matter what it is, kind of in life, is if you plan, do a good job, usually it's going to save you the big three: time, energy, and money. And I think in this day and age, all of us are looking for more time and more energy and more money. So, yeah, I think planning is always the way to go. And like I said, I know I find myself staring out the window, when it's cold winter days, thinking about all the things I want to get done and start making that list.
That's Dennis Patton. He's the K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Johnson County. Again, more information for planting a garden is available at county and district extension offices and online at ksre.ksu.edu. For a free copy of the Kansas Garden Guide, visit the online K-State Research and Extension bookstore. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.